Recently I got a few Waney edge slabs of what I believe to be beech. Here's one of the lengths, which I'd already cut in half so that I could fit it into my van. These pieces had been stored in a disused warehouse for over 10 years, so I expected it to be dry, and when I checked with my moisture meter, it was showing at around 6% moisture content, so I knew that this wood should be stable enough and ready to use. The slabs were rough sawn, but I could tell that once cleaned up, these pieces of wood would be really beautiful. And they were a really good size, so it seemed like it would be a huge shame to cut it up into pieces, so I decided I'd use one of these pieces to make a really simple coffee tabletop and retain most of its natural shape. This piece measured 117 centimeters in length, between 48 and 54 centimeters wide, and 4.2 centimeters thick. Sighting down the length of the board, I could tell that there was a slight twist in the slab. You can see here that the back left and front right corners are high points. And across the width of the slab there had also been some warping. You can see here that the sides are higher than the center by around 10 millimeters. I started to flatten what would be the bottom side of the coffee table using my cordless planer. I'm making several passes down each edge to try and get it more flat. I took some passes at a 45-degree angle to the grain too to even everything up. Then I rotated the piece so I could work on the other side, which had a high point in the middle, so I worked on flattening that too. This was a pretty lengthy process, so I took this time-lapse footage. I kept checking for progress with my ruler. Then I brought the slab into the workshop so that I could work on removing the twist from the board. By placing the slab onto the flat surface of my workbench, I could use my hands to figure out which corners were the high points, and then I rotated it again, marked up the high points with a pencil, and removed more material. This is the bottom of the tabletop, and I wanted to get this as flat as I could so that the table frame that I'll make later can support the top evenly. I repeatedly turned it over, brushed away the chips from my workbench, and checked for wobble again. And you can see here that one corner is getting quite thin at this point, but that didn't really matter as I knew I'd be cutting away some of that length later. Here I'm checking again for flatness with my ruler, marking up any high spots with a pencil, and doing some more flattening using the planer. At this point the bottom was flat enough so that all of the wobble had gone, and I'd been working on it for a solid 6 or so hours by now, so I was pleased with the progress. Then I started working on flattening the top side of the slab again. I also needed to remove all of the rough sawn areas and keep the thickness consistent across the whole slab. A couple of weeks ago I put out a video about my Makita cordless range of tools, and in that video I talked about the planer being a tool that was nice to have but one that I could live without. But this project has definitely given me a newfound appreciation for the tool, and I don't think there's really any other way I could have flattened this slab without it. The slab is too big to manoeuvre onto my jointer and it's too wide as well. I couldn't have flattened this with a traditional hand plane like this, the record number 5. It would have just taken far too long. It probably would have taken me weeks if not months to get it flat. I don't think I could have used my belt sander either. Even with a really coarse 40 grit paper, it would have taken too long, and it's not really a tool that can be used accurately for flattening. Another option would have been to make a router sled, but that just seemed like far too much work, and also I don't really have any space to store something like that. So I've been using this practically all day. I think I've changed the batteries maybe 5 times. They've just been on constant rotation between the tool and the charger, and I've really enjoyed using it. Next, I started to remove the bark from the edges. If all the bark had been intact, I probably would have left it on there, but there were a few missing areas, so I decided to take it all off. That was the end of day 1. On day 2, I had the idea of using some winding sticks just to double check that all of the twist had been removed from the slab. And I don't have any winding sticks, so I'm just using a couple of straight offcuts of particle board. These help to emphasize any twist in the board so that it's easier to see. So by placing one at each end, I could sight along the top of each of the sticks to check for twist. And it looked pretty good, but I could see that there was still some twist in the board, so it was back to flattening the bottom and checking for wobble once again, until I was happy that it was as flat as I could get it. Finally, I took some very light passes with the planer in the direction of the grain just to get as good a surface as I possibly could using the planer. And then I started planing with my record number 5 hand plane with a freshly sharpened blade, and I'm just taking light passes to remove any ridges left by the electric planer and get everything nice and smooth. To cut the slab to its final length, I first marked up a centre point along the width at each end of the slab, and then clamped on a straight edge lined up with those marks. And then using a framing square referencing against that straight edge, I could mark up a cut line so that the ends of the board would be at a perfect 90-degree angle to the centre of the board. I did that at both ends and then extended the line the full width of the slab. Then I clamped on a straight edge and made the cut in 2 passes using my circular saw, just to make it easier on the blade because this wood is really quite thick and dense. I cut both ends and then I moved on to sanding. I started at 100 grit with my random orbit sander. The top was already very smooth from all of the hand planing, but I decided to sand mainly because there were a couple of small areas of grain tear out where there were some imperfections within the wood grain caused by the electric planer blades, and sanding those away seemed like the best option. Then I did some scraping with my card scraper to get the finish nice and smooth and remove any swirl marks left by the sander. I did some more sanding to ease over any sharp edges. To clean up the edges of the slab, I used my electric power file. I also used this to soften the corners. Next I could add finish, and first I applied some boiled linseed oil. I applied quite a lot and just left it to soak into the wood as much as possible. The end grain really soaked up that oil quickly, so I reapplied a few times until it stopped soaking in. The oil had raised the grain slightly, so using some 400 grit wet and dry paper, I smoothed it over again by hand. Then I removed any dust from sanding with a cotton cloth. I think I gave the slab 3 or 4 coats in total. To give the tabletop more of a hard wearing finish, I used spray varnish. I applied 3 coats of this in total and did some denibbing in between each coat once it was dry with some 600 grit wet and dry paper before applying the next coat. And then I could clear away all of the shavings, and there were enough here to fill 2 black bin bags. The final thickness of the slab was 32mm, so I'd taken off 10mm in total from the thickness of the slab to get it flat. It took much longer than I'd expected to get this slab flat, and I've already spent about a day and a half just on the top alone. Next I can start working on the table frame, and I've already got a few ideas around what that might look like. That will be covered in part 2, which will be coming soon to my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed working on the slab. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.